The dust hung low over the frontier town. Wagon wheels creaked and boots stamped across the square. A dry wind rattled a broken sign above the tavern. Through the noise came a man with a hard face and tired eyes. The narrator spoke his name, Ezekiel Ward, the trader. His coat was worn, his beard rough, his boots heavy with miles. At his side he carried a leather ledger, bound with string. That ledger was no common book. It held debts, deals, and the marks of every man who had crossed him. Locals turned their heads. One farmer whispered, "That's him, that's the one who left 3 men with nothing." A ranch hand spat. "Debt's his weapon." The crowd shifted uneasy. Ezekiel Ward, the trader, heard each word. His fingers tightened on the ledger as if gripping steel. He stepped into the tavern. The room fell quiet for a breath. Then voices rose again in hushed tones. The barkeep glanced at him, then back to his glass. Ezekiel Ward sat alone at the corner table, his cloak draped low, shadowing his eyes. He opened the ledger and brushed dirt from its cover. The proof of his life's work stared back at him. Names, numbers, losses. The pages were his shield and his curse. The door slammed. A stranger, broad-shouldered and fast with words, strode in. He looked at Ezekiel and said, "Past deeds carry far. Enemies remember." The tavern hushed again. Ezekiel Ward did not answer. He only closed the ledger and set it firm on the table. His silence was its own reply. Then came the twist. Another rider burst through the door, face pale, coat torn. "Raiders!" he shouted. "Near the river!" The crowd erupted in panic. Chairs scraped, boots hit the floor. The barkeep cursed under his breath. Ezekiel Ward did not move. He poured a drink, steady hand, eyes fixed on the ledger. Yet his jaw tightened. He knew the river. He knew what the river had taken, and he knew danger always waited there. The narrator closed the scene. Ezekiel Ward sought only rest. But rest would not come. His name, his ledger, his past, they all carried weight. And now whispers of raiders would tie his path to fate once more. But Ezekiel's name carried farther than he thought. The sun burned low, throwing heat across the plain. Dust rose with every hoofbeat. The sound of rushing water grew louder as the river cut through the land. The narrator called his name again, Ezekiel Ward, the trader. He guided his horse down the trail, eyes narrowed against the glare. The leather ledger hung from his side, the same book of debts that never left his reach. The river had always been a place of danger for Ezekiel Ward. A cry broke the air. "Ezekiel!" Ward slowed the horse. On the far bank, a girl stood trapped. She was no older than 10. Her boots sank in the mud as the river foamed behind her. 3 raiders on horseback circled, their laughter sharp as knives. The girl clutched something in her hand. Sunlight flashed on a necklace of small carved beads. That necklace was no toy. It was a proof token, carried with desperate care. The beads shook in her small fist as the raiders closed in. One raider lifted a blade. Another jeered, "Nowhere to run." The girl's eyes darted, and then locked on the lone rider across the bank. She looked not at the raiders, not at the river, but straight at Ezekiel Ward, the trader. Ezekiel Ward froze. He had ridden past strangers in need before. His ledger had been his shield. His trade had been his only cause. He gripped the reins, ready to turn. But then came the twist. The girl's voice cut through the noise. "Ward!" she screamed. The name struck him like a blow. Ezekiel Ward stiffened in the saddle. How could this child know him? The raiders laughed louder, blades flashing in the sun. The girl's hand shook, beads catching the light once more. Ezekiel Ward looked down at the ledger on his belt. The proof of debts, the weight of his ruthless past meant nothing now. He swung off the saddle. His boots slammed into the dirt. The horse snorted and reared back. The raiders sneered. One spurred forward. Ezekiel Ward planted his feet between the girl and the men. The river roared at his back. Dust spun into the wind. The beads in the girl's hand glimmered like fire. The narrator's voice pressed close. Ezekiel Ward, once ruthless, now stood as a wall. Her voice carried his name. The river roared like a beast. Foam churned against the rocks. The ground shook. Under the pounding hooves of raiders, the narrator spoke again. Ezekiel Ward, the trader. He stood between the girl and the men on horseback. At his belt, the leather ledger still hung, swollen with years of debts. That book was his shield, his curse, and his proof of power. A raider spurred forward. Steel flashed. Ezekiel Ward raised his pistol and fired once. Smoke filled the air. One man dropped from the saddle. The horse reared, screaming. The girl pressed back toward the water, beads in her hand rattling against each other. Another raider charged, knife in hand. Ezekiel Ward pulled the trigger again. The pistol jammed. No shot came. The raider laughed and lunged. Ezekiel Ward swung the pistol like a club. Metal cracked against bone. The fight collapsed into fists and dirt. The girl cried out. The river surged behind her, waves snapping at her boots. Ezekiel Ward shoved the raider back, but the ledger tumbled from his belt. The leather struck the mud. Pages burst loose, bleeding black ink into the water. For the first time, Ezekiel Ward saw. His life's debts dissolved before his eyes. Another rider rushed in. Ezekiel Ward took the blow to his shoulder. Teeth gritted. He struck back, fist against jaw. He staggered, turned, and grabbed the girl by the arm. "Hold on," he growled. Her small hand clutched the beads as he dragged her toward the river. Together, they plunged into the current. The water was ice. It dragged them under, clawing at their bodies. Ezekiel Ward kicked hard, lungs screaming. His boots filled heavy with water. His strength faltered. The girl's beads glimmered under the surface. She held them high even as the current tried to tear them away. Ezekiel Ward pushed her upward. She gasped for air. He shoved her forward, forcing her above the flow. His chest burned, but he fought to keep her alive. They slammed against rocks, cut skin and spun in the whirl of foam. At last they crawled onto the far bank. Both collapsed in the mud, coughing, choking, gasping for breath. The girl curled around the beads, hands shaking. Ezekiel Ward fell, to his knees drenched, blood mixing with river silt. Across the water the raiders gathered in the trees. Their leader pointed a long finger at him. "Ward!" the man shouted. "We'll take you next time." The others laughed, then vanished into the woods. Ezekiel Ward's chest heaved. His ledger was gone, drowned and ruined in the mud. The debts of a lifetime carried away. Only the girl remained. Only the bead still shone in her hand, proof that one choice could weigh heavier than 100 trades. The narrator's voice cut through the roar of water. The river carried away his past, but not his enemies. The night closed in. The wind howled through broken timbers. The burned cabin stood like a black skeleton against the trees. The narrator spoke his name again, Ezekiel Ward, the trader. He pushed open the charred door. Ash crumbled under his boots. He set the girl inside and struck flint. Sparks caught, and a weak flame flickered to life. The firelight showed his hands trembling from the cold and from the fight at the river. The girl sat close to the fire. Her eyes were swollen red. Her small fingers touched the beads on her necklace, the same proof token Ezekiel Ward had seen at the riverbank. She looked up and whispered, "My name is Clara Finch." Ezekiel Ward, the trader, nodded. The name settled heavy in the room. Clara Finch told him her story. The raiders had killed her parents. They had taken her brother alive. Her voice cracked, but she did not stop. She held up the beads and said, "These were my mother's. The Tua." Flame snapped. Ezekiel Ward stared at the necklace. His chest tightened. The carved beads were not strange to him. He remembered them from years past. He had once traded beads just like these. The deal had left a family in ruin. His profit had been their loss. Now those same beads rested in the hand of Clara Finch, the child of that loss. Clara Finch leaned closer to the fire. Her face shone with the orange glow. She asked, "Why did you help me?" Ezekiel Ward, the trader, had no words. He pulled his cloak from his shoulders and placed it around her. That was his answer. Outside, wolves howled in the dark. The burned cabin creaked as the wind pressed against its frame. Ezekiel Ward sat near the doorway, sharpening his knife. The steel scraped in rhythm with the fire's crackle. His eyes never left the door. His shoulders stayed ready. Clara Finch curled on the floor, wrapped in his cloak. Her small hand gripped the bead necklace tight. The proof token rested against her cheek as her eyes closed. The narrator's voice pressed in. Ezekiel. Ward had once broken families with his greed. Tonight, mercy forced him to protect one. The beads tied her family's loss to his own greed. The forest floor was wet. Mud clung to every step. A crow screamed above the pines, and silence followed. The narrator spoke his name. Ezekiel Ward, the trader. He led the girl through a narrow trail. Fallen branches cracked under his boots. His eyes scanned the ground behind them. Every footprint told a story. And this story had hunters. Far behind them, 3 raiders crouched near the riverbank. One touched the mud and grinned. Fresh, he said. Another pointed to the boot marks. They're close. The raiders mounted again and pressed forward. They were not guessing, they were tracking. Ezekiel Ward, the trader, stopped beside a fallen log. He crouched low, he pointed to the ground. "Step where I step," he whispered. Clara Finch nodded. She held the beads in her hand. The proof token swung with each small movement. Sunlight caught on the carvings. The beads glinted like fire. "Stay quiet," Ezekiel said. "No voice, no cry." Clara Finch pressed her lips shut. Her breath trembled. But as they moved deeper into the trees, Clara Finch grabbed his coat. "We can't run forever," she whispered. "My brother's out there." The words struck like a stone. Ezekiel Ward, the trader, stopped. He looked at the girl. He saw the beads in her hand. He saw the same set he once sold to a broken man for a bag of furs. That man had begged for mercy. Ezekiel had walked away. Now mercy walked beside him, and mercy slowed him down. Ezekiel Ward turned away. He heard the raiders' shouts echo through the trees. He looked at his boots, his knife, his path. He could leave her. Alone, he could survive. The forest was wide. The hills were many. The narrator asked, "Is survival worth more than mercy?" He took one step forward, just one. Then came the twist. Behind him, Clara Finch whispered, "Don't leave me." Her voice was small. Her fingers clung to the beads. The proof token shook in her hand. Her eyes were wide, wet, and fixed on him. Ezekiel Ward, the trader, froze. His breath hitched. The forest went silent again. The narrator's voice fell low. He had walked away from strangers before, but this one called him back. But when she whispered, "Don't leave me," his choice was sealed. The smoke of campfires rose between the trees. Horses stamped the ground. Shadows of armed men moved against the firelight. The narrator spoke his name. Ezekiel Ward, the trader. His face was hard, but his steps slowed as he drew near. The burned cloak on his shoulders hung heavy. He carried no ledger now, only a knife at his belt and the weight of choice. Through the firelight he saw the boy, a young figure tied to a post, rope cutting into his arms. That boy was no stranger. The boy was Clara Finch's brother. His head hung low, but his chest still rose and fell. Clara Finch gasped and clutched her bead necklace, the proof token that never left her hand. The beads shook as she whispered, "It's him." A raider captain stepped forward. His eyes gleamed sharp as glass. "Ward," he called. "Come, out where we can see you." Ezekiel Ward, the trader, stepped into the glow. Torches lit his face. The captain smirked. "You want the boy? Trade your life for his." The camp burst with laughter. Men slammed fists on shields. Horses snorted. The boy stirred weakly against the ropes. Clara Finch stepped forward, but Ezekiel Ward's arm stopped her. He shook his head. Ezekiel Ward's voice cut the noise. "Take me. Let the boy go." The raiders fell quiet. Then the laughter turned darker. The captain circled Ezekiel Ward. "A man who counted every coin now offers himself." "Why?" Clara Finch cried out. "No, don't do this." She held the beads high, shaking in her hand. The necklace flashed in the firelight, the same beads Ezekiel once traded for profit years ago. Ezekiel Ward looked at them, then back to Clara Finch. His jaw set. The narrator pressed close. This man had traded all his life. Now, for the first time, he traded himself. The captain raised his hand. "Agreed. Your life for his." The raiders cut the boy free. Clara Finch rushed to her brother, pulling him close. For a moment, hope seemed real, but then came the twist. The captain leaned near Ezekiel Ward and whispered, "You'll never leave this place." The raiders drew blades. The laughter returned, sharper than before. Clara Finch froze, clutching. Her brother and the beads, eyes wide with fear. Ezekiel Ward, the trader, stood tall. His knife glinted at his side. He knew betrayal had always been the way of raiders. He also knew this was the cost of change. The narrator asked, "Would you risk yourself to save a child who is not your own?" The fire roared. The circle of raiders closed in. Clara Finch clung to the boy. The beads pressed against her heart. Ezekiel Ward had traded all his life, but never himself. The night was black. The campfires hissed in the wind. Horses stamped nervously against their ropes. Shadows of men moved. Quick between tents, the narrator called his name again, Ezekiel Ward, the trader. He stood chained near the fire pit. His hands bled, but his eyes stayed sharp. Across the camp, Clara Finch held her brother close. The bead necklace, her proof token, swung against her chest. A raider captain sneered, "At dawn, Ward dies." The raiders laughed. The fire cracked. Clara Finch shook her head, gripping the beads until her knuckles turned white. Then came the break. A spark leapt from the fire into a stack of dry brush. Flames surged higher. In the chaos, Ezekiel Ward tore free the rope binding his wrists. He lunged for a fallen blade. The steel hissed as it cut the night. The fight erupted. A raider swung an axe. Ezekiel Ward ducked and drove the knife into his gut. Another came from behind. Fists slammed, teeth shattered. Blood splashed into the dirt. Horses screamed, rearing as sparks rained down. Clara Finch shouted, "Now!" She dragged her brother through the smoke. The beads slipped in her grip, the necklace tearing loose. Carved beads scattered across the dirt like drops of fire. Ezekiel Ward saw the beads fall. The proof token rolled past his boots. He kicked, a raider aside, and grabbed the girl's brother, shoving both children toward the gap in the burning fence. "Run!" he roared. A raider blade slashed across his back. Ezekiel Ward staggered but turned, rage blazing. He drove his shoulder into the man, sending both crashing into the fire. The camp burst into full blaze. Tents collapsed in red flame. The sky glowed. More raiders closed in. One cut deep into Ezekiel Ward's side. His knees buckled. Still, he swung the knife, forcing space for Clara Finch and her brother to escape. The children stumbled into the dark woods, coughing but alive. The narrator pressed, Ezekiel Ward, once ruthless, now fought not for profit, but for mercy. The raider captain raised a spear. Ezekiel Ward's breath came shallow. He planted his feet one last time. He blocked the path, arms wide, firelight behind him. The beads glimmered in the mud at his feet, torn from Clara Finch's hands. The spear struck. Ezekiel Ward fell to one knee, blood soaking the ground. But the children had vanished into the forest. Their cries faded, carried by the wind. The fire roared higher, swallowing the camp. The raiders shouted, scattered, broken by flame. The narrator's voice cut close. His blood marked the bargain paid in full. The wind moved soft across the valley. Grass bent in waves. A small stone marker stood at the center of the hill. The narrator spoke his name once more. Ezekiel Ward, the trader, E. His body had long been gone, but the ground held his rest. Where fire once burned and blood once fell, now only quiet remained. From the ridge came a figure. A woman rode slow, her back straight, her face marked by years. This was Clara Finch, no longer a child. At her neck she wore the beads. The proof token had been restrung, each carving cleaned, each bead whole. She dismounted and walked to the stone. Clara Finch placed her hand on the grave. Her voice was steady. "I did not forget." The beads clicked in her fingers. The same necklace she had clutched as a child, the same necklace Ezekiel Ward had seen in the firelight, now hung bright against her chest. Then the earth seemed to move. From the valley came riders, dozens, then hundreds. Horses lined the ridge. Warriors stepped down, their faces solemn. One by one more arrived. 300 warriors stood in silence. They did not raise weapons, they did not speak. They bowed their heads. The narrator pressed, "This honor was not for a trader who counted debts. This honor was for a man who had changed. Clara Finch looked around her. She had feared only silence. Instead, she saw respect. She felt the weight of 300 eyes lowered toward the grave of Ezekiel Ward. The moment cracked her voice. She whispered again, "He saved me. He saved my brother." The warriors moved as one. Their hands pressed to their hearts. Their shadows stretched long in the late sun. Clara Finch lifted the beads and laid them across the stone. The necklace gleamed in the light, each bead a reminder of both loss and mercy. The narrator asked, "What is stronger, fear of a ruthless name or honor for a merciful one?" Clara Finch closed her eyes. The sound of the river returned in her memory. She saw him again, boots in the mud, pistol in hand, blood in the fire. She saw him give himself for her and for her brother. The warriors did not cheer. They did not. Sawip. They only bowed lower. The silence itself was the voice of honor. The narrator's voice fell quiet. Ezekiel Ward's fire was gone, but his mercy lived. Even the ruthless can be remembered for mercy. The river moved steady under the sun. Water rushed over stone, the same river where blood and ash once mixed. The banks had changed, but the sound was the same. The narrator spoke the name, Ezekiel Ward, the trader. His ledger was gone, washed, into the current years before. His debts had dissolved in the mud. Only memory remained. At the grave on the hill, Clara Finch stood in silence. She was no longer a child. Lines of age marked her face. At her neck hung the proof token, the bead, necklace that once shook in her small hands. Now the beads were whole, restrung on new cord. Clara Finch knelt and pulled the necklace free. She whispered, "This belongs here." She set the beads on the stone. The carved beads, once her mother's, once seen by Ezekiel Ward in firelight, now rested at his grave. The narrator pressed. The ledger proved debts. The beads proved mercy. Both had been tokens, but only one survived. Clara Finch touched the stone. Her voice trembled. "You saved me. You saved my brother. We did not forget." The wind swept across the valley. 300 warriors still came each year. They bowed in silence, not to a ruthless trader, but to a man who gave himself for others. They honored Ezekiel Ward with their stillness. The narrator asked, "What weighs heavier, a life spent taking or one moment of giving?" The river answered with its endless roar. It had carried away Ezekiel Ward's ledger. It had carried away the blood of raiders, but it could not carry away his name. The camera lingered on the stone. Clara Finch stood, her hand pressed to her chest. Her eyes closed as the warriors bowed once more. The beads caught the light one last time before the sun dipped low. The narrator's voice slowed. Ezekiel Ward's fire ended in blood, but his mercy lit a memory that could not die. Would you have chosen vengeance, or would you have chosen mercy? Clara. Finch turned from the grave. The wind pulled at her cloak. The river kept flowing. The narrator left the final echo. The river kept flowing, but his name remained.